Welcome back to The Small Nonprofit, the podcast where your passion meets action. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Small Nonprofit Podcast. Today, I have a unique guest for you because this is someone that I've been working with for a few months and someone who is actually the first full-time employee at Further Together. So I'd love to introduce her to you. Hi, Caitlin.
Hi, how are you?
I'm so good. I'm so excited that you're here.
I'm so excited to be here. This is such a fun moment for me because I've been listening to this podcast for 5 years now. So this feels so surreal. It's awesome. Definitely a full circle moment.
Can you quickly introduce yourself to anyone who might not know you yet?
For sure. Yeah. So my name is Caitlin McBride. I am a fundraiser. I've been a fundraiser for nearly 11 years now, and I've worked with charities all over the place. I actually started my career in Scotland, working for a large children's organization there. And I've moved on to other kind of smaller grassroots charities. And for the last kind of 5 years or so of my career, I've been the fundraising department in the organizations that I worked at, as is the case for many people and many organizations. But yeah, so I was doing that for the latter half of my career, and now I have moved over into the consulting world, and we started working together earlier this year. It's been fun.
Did you get into fundraising on purpose?
I think I'm one of those rare people who actively chose fundraising rather than it being forced upon me. When I was in Scotland, I knew that I wanted to be in the nonprofit world, but I didn't know exactly where. I don't tell many people this, but my first job out of university was working in asset management. So it was high end finance, which was not aligned with my values and goals at all. So I knew I wanted to get out of there and I wanted to be a nonprofit, but I wasn't sure exactly where I wanted to go there. So I ended up taking a mat leave contract at an organization just in a kind of admin reception role. And then I was able to see all the different functions of the organization. I got to know the fundraiser there really well, and she was doing really cool stuff. I really love writing, so she was doing all this writing and communications and events, and this is before I burned out from events, so I was really into that. And I was like, okay, that's going to be my next step. So when that contract came to an end, I went for a fundraising job.
Okay, I was gonna ask, so did you take any courses or anything? And then you show up and you're kind of like, I'm a one-person department, like no one can do this, right?
It took a little while before I became the one person department. So I started in large nonprofits and then ended up kind of getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So the first organization that I worked for, still in Scotland, we had 90 people in the admin office. So it was huge, one of Scotland's largest charities. We had a 6-person team just for foundation fundraising, things like that. I know, right? Yeah. Yeah, so it was very different to I think what a lot of fundraisers experience. And then yeah, moved into sort of a mid-level organization. And then after that, I decided to try my hand at an organization that had never actually had a fundraising staff before. So I was the only person setting up all the systems from the ground level. That was an interesting ride.
So I did face-to-face fundraising before moving into nonprofit, and my first nonprofit job was a mat leave contract as well. And that team, I think, had about 11 people out of 400 staff who were fundraisers, and I was kind of like an admin person that was supporting the president of the foundation. And then other jobs, I think I've been either the one fundraiser or maybe maximum a team of five. So, with your experience, what do you think has been the biggest difference with being the only fundraiser versus, nine people to one team?
I think it's really capacity and having to set boundaries for yourself and acknowledging that you can't do everything. It might be this new trend in fundraising might be happening and it might be great and your board might think it's a great idea, but you're one person and it's just not feasible. So it's really capacity and setting up those boundaries. On the flip side, there's the ability to be agile and do your own thing and set up your own systems and go for something if you think it seems really interesting. I found the freedom of that really fun. It was scary at first because coming from a bigger team and then being on your own, it takes a little while to really trust your own voice. There's no one else who's going to be in the room who's going to back you up. So, when I was in, or my very first board meeting at this organization, I had been in these larger organizations and been part of a team. So, like, I had about 5 years of experience at that point. I knew my way around fundraising and knew the lingo and everything. I had some experience under my belt, but it was in a very specific area. And so a topic of a fundraising question came up, and everybody just slowly turned and looked at me. I answered something that seemed to appease everybody, but I was like, okay, I need to know all the things. So that was an interesting process to like trust myself on that because I had no one else in the room to provide a second voice.
I think that's such a blessing and a curse.
Totally.
Yeah, because like the curse side is you have to learn everything alone, which is
Mm-hmm.
a big barrier. For me, I taught myself how to design a website and how to set myself up on PayPal giving and things like that, right? Like, what is Facebook Pixel? All these things I had to like teach myself. But the agility piece, I really loved because small organization that I worked at, where I was the only fundraiser, the ED trusted my opinion very exclusively because they knew that, I don't know anything about fundraising, so I'm going to let you do it, which was great. Like there was a lot of autonomy to kind of direct the strategy, but also a shit ton of pressure.
Yeah. Yeah. That was something that frustrated me in larger organizations. I could see inefficiencies and I could see things where we could be doing things better. But, it was this is the way we've always done it mantra. It was really hard to change things when you're the only person. There's no approval process. You just do it, which is great. But there is a loneliness to it as well. When you're in an organization where you're the only fundraiser, because fundraising is such an external role. So you probably have like program team and everything in there, but they're focusing really like internally. Whereas like you're always building relationships externally. It can be really lonely. I found I needed to find support where I could, learn where I could, connect with people. And funnily enough, this is how I found the small nonprofit. So when I first started my solo fundraising career, one of the first podcasts I found, and yeah, it was just hugely helpful to me to listen to some of the advice and speakers, and it felt like having an additional person like supporting me and giving me language that I could then use with my board, with donors, and yeah, it was really really helpful.
That loneliness part is so real
Mm-hmm.
just because like no one else at the organization will understand what you do and how you do it.
Yeah, and it's so important to form those relationships with your program team to be able to support fundraising and everything. But yeah, there's been so many times where like they've all been involved in a project, acknowledging each other and saying thanks for the hard work. As a fundraiser, you don't really get that because nobody else sees your hard work except for the funder who is reviewing your proposal. And they're not going to be like, good job. You're not going to get like an A star or gold star or anything on that. They're just going to be like, yes or no.
Yeah. Oh, and I feel like people don't even value your time as much as they should. They're like, "Oh, how hard could it be to do this social media post or this grant? Just get it done as soon as you can and kind of just throw things your way."
Like, I can get it done badly as soon as I can, but if you want it done well,
Yeah, if you want the money, I need more than 2 minutes to write it.
exactly, exactly. Yeah.
So, fundraising as a one person department is a big role and can lead to a lot of burnout, a lot of issues, a lot of putting more on your shoulders. So, what do you think people can do to overcome some of those issues?
Yeah. I think some of the things that I did, like, I'm a very systems minded person and a tech forward person. I really like using systems and building systems and using the tech that I have at my disposal to make my life easier. That was like one of the first things that I really tried to do was to get some of those systems in place. My first thing at both the organizations where I served as a sole fundraiser was diving into their CRM and doing a big clean because I needed to quickly extract information for donors and donor calls and proposals like in an instant. I didn't have time to wade through multiple Word documents and things like that. So making sure that my systems were streamlined, I had processes, and I had that kind of supporting me. I think the other thing that came as a revelation, maybe when I was a little bit farther into being a sole fundraiser, was that my job wasn't to be at every single ask and every single fundraising event. My job was to empower others in the organization to fundraise and to make the ask and support them in their efforts to cultivate relationships. That realization took the pressure off of myself because I felt like if I wasn't at this donor ask or I wasn't at every single sale or fundraising event, that like I was failing because I'm the fundraiser. But that was like way too much for me to handle as one person. So I think those pieces, yeah, were really kind of key. And then, as I said, building relationships with the program staff, making sure they trusted me and could provide the information I needed. When it came down to it, really kind of trusting my instincts. And that takes time. But eventually I got there, being able to trust my own voice and trust my instincts and know that I do have the experience and I do know what I'm talking about and I can do this.
So funny because when someone empowers, like asking you questions, it's so easy to just be like, I have no idea what I'm talking about, even though
Yeah,
I've been for 10 years.
I
And you
know.
do. But the second guessing can be so real. The imposter syndrome can really seep in there.
Totally, especially if it's the first time going out on your own and coming from a team where like I was sort of a mid-level. I had people above me and everything. And I think, I can't say that it was a experience in a team where I felt very like empowered and it like kind of built up my self-esteem. So I wasn't coming from a place where I was like, I'm good, I know this. I had to build up that trust in myself, and the imposter syndrome for the first little bit was so real until I realized, oh no, I know this. This is fine.
I feel like sometimes you can get those little wins, like, oh, someone said they'll give $1,000. Like, yay, I can do
Yeah,
this. 3 million more
totally.
to go.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I was lucky in that sense, coming from these large organizations and then going into something small where I had those years of experience behind me and I could see how an organization was supposed to function. Like I could see like all the different pieces of it and how that sort of worked together, and then sort of rebuild it in a smaller way at my organizations. I have to say, now I think I'm seeing more and more people who don't have any experience becoming a fundraiser on their own and being the only fundraising staff in an organization. So that's another challenge people are trying to navigate because inflation has gone up so much over the last few years. Like the salary I was getting as a sole fundraiser, now you wouldn't get somebody with 5 years of experience coming into that role. You'd be getting somebody who has maybe some volunteer experience. Like that's about it. So I think that is really tough when you're starting a position where you're on your own and you don't have that experience to fall back on. So that can be really challenging.
Some of the like concerning trends in this like one person department things that I've seen as well is when someone hires a communications person to do communications and fundraising as like their
Mm-hmm.
sole one person, two departments. Um,
Been there.
and when the ED is also the only fundraiser at the organization. So fundraising lives
Mm.
exclusively in the ED.
Yeah, that can be really hard. When you have one person doing fundraising, that's the person that holds those relationships too. If you don't have somebody who brings that fundraising background, sometimes they build those relationships just with themselves rather than working to build that relationship with the organization. Like it can be hard. There's a skill in making a relationship that will last beyond your personal interactions with somebody. So that can be really hard when somebody's not bringing that experience or they're the executive director and they're kind of like the figurehead, and then maybe they move on to a different organization. And then sometimes they take donors with them, or the donors will like, well, I was giving to this person, not to the cause. And I've definitely seen that. And it's rough.
What do you think are the top 2 to 3 actionable career skills for a one person fundraising department?
Mm, I think for me, definitely it's organization, being really organized. You don't have to be a CRM designer or anything like that, but just like being organized, being skillful about that, and being intentional about that. And yeah, some people are kind of scared of tech, like being able to embrace technology to make your life better and make it easier. And I think that if you don't do that, then you're really gonna struggle. So being willing to learn, and I think maybe that's another big aspect of it and everything, is being willing to learn and having being willing to like be humble and have humility in everything that you do, and acknowledge that like not everything you do is going to work, and that's okay. The exciting thing is that you get to try new things, but not all of those things are going to fly. It is hard doing that as a sole person because there's no one else to blame if something goes wrong. But it is just accepting that and understanding that, like, yeah, you might try something and it might fail, and you're going to learn from that. I think that fundraising can be such a high pressure job that we're so scared to fail. And, you know, we put so much pressure on ourselves to raise the funds because we're so dedicated and committed to the causes that we support. So, not being afraid to just try something new. If it fails, you're okay.
I feel like as women, there's a pressure to be perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Then you come into a sector where there's a lot of other people who are high achievers. So there's a little bit of competition. And then there's the community need that, if you fail as a one person fundraising department, like people lose their jobs.
Mm-hmm.
It's just really hard to not burn out in that scenario.
Yeah. And I mean, I did burn out. Like, I can say that that is something that happened for me. And I hope to anybody who I talk to now who is a sole fundraiser, I'm trying to give them advice and tips and everything how to not do that. But I think you're right. I put so much pressure on myself. And particularly in the fields that I worked in, which, as you know, was working with children who had cancer diagnosis. For me, that was just such a personal thing as a person and also as a parent. I put so much pressure on myself to meet targets and increase revenue. And I didn't really hold my boundaries well enough. And the revenue targets kept increasing and the budget kept increasing, and support didn't materialize to help me reach that. So I fizzled out, unfortunately. And, you know, I wish it hadn't happened, but I am glad to have made this transition into the consulting world. I think that is where I wanted to go in the long term. Yay. But yeah, I definitely, for other people who are a fundraising department or are the only person responsible for it, it is just so important to set those boundaries, to know that you cannot exponentially grow revenue and continue to maintain your current portfolio. At my previous organization, I was there for almost 3 years. And in the first 2 years, we increased the fundraising revenue by 130%. That was amazing and so great. And I'm so proud of what we were able to do. But that increased my fundraising portfolio by 130%. And so it was like, I felt like I was continually expected to increase that revenue without the acknowledgement that all of that portfolio still took work. That was not guaranteed. I still need to maintain those relationships and reporting, and then also grow revenue on top of that. That was just not sustainable. So,
Yeah, it's like there's an expectation to, okay, you did really well maintaining a relationship with 10 people and not with 400 people. How?
exactly. I was only able to have that good relationship with those 100 people because that was my portfolio. Those were my people. And now you're adding so many others on top and expecting that to increase. So I
With
think it's
very
really,
little understanding of actual solicitation and
yeah.
relationship building.
Yeah, and the work that goes into it. Like, it is so much work. Even just sending a quick email to a donor sometimes takes time to craft something and send the right thing and hit the right note and understand their motivations. It's not just a 5-minute job. It takes work and time and effort. So,
Which is why I'm so concerned about EDs being the only fundraiser as well.
yeah, I think it's a very rare person and a very rare ED who has the skill set to both manage all of the program side of things and also do the fundraising. Those are very different skill sets. And to find those in one person is very rare. Usually, if you're expecting both from that person, they will eventually burn out and leave. And
Plus
then,
HR, plus finances,
yeah,
plus.
yeah, calling their bank on a Saturday afternoon when the credit card's been canceled, all of those things. I definitely feel for executive directors right now who have more and more on their plate with less and less.
I've talked to my therapist a lot about, burnout and like nonprofit culture and like this, like, you have to do more, otherwise people get fired, right? People lose their jobs. And I don't know, I feel like there's so many things that we put on ourselves. It's like, oh, I should do self-care, when sometimes this is an expectation of your role. I wonder kind of what your thoughts are around, systemic issues in nonprofit or your organization versus the role of self-care when it comes to burnout.
Mm, that's a really good question. Sometimes self care is, you're kind of told like you have to make time for self care. I'm like, but unless you build that into my work week or my work day, it's not going to happen. I think we particularly said like as women and it's in a sector that is predominantly staffed by women, put so much pressure on ourselves to achieve and to exceed expectations, especially when the cause is so near and dear to your heart. Like, you're talking about not raising funds and people getting fired. That's a huge motivator. When one of the organizations I worked at, we were providing meals to people who had a child with cancer. And what was going through my head was, if I don't do this, if I don't push myself, then families aren't going to get fed. And like that just felt so heartbreaking that like it was going to be like my fault that these families who are going through this terrible time in their lives weren't going to eat. That just feels so tangible. So I think that, we put so much pressure on ourselves to succeed and achieve. And then there's this kind of like, can you also just carve out some time for self-care? Is that cool? Like, make time for that. No, like as soon as my workday finishes, I'm on my other shift, which is mom, until 9 o'clock at night. Like the other day I realized that I pull 13, 14-hour shifts 7 days a week as a parent, and I'm like, self-care doesn't always feel like a high priority when you have not just pressure from bosses and everything, but that real internal pressure to do good and support the people who are relying on your organization.
I think sometimes we fall into black and white or binary thinking as well. It's like, if I don't close this gift, like X, Y, and Z will happen. When that's not always
Mm-hmm.
the case. Maybe another gift comes through that you
Yeah.
weren't expecting, right? Or people will get fired. And it's like, you don't know if there's additional reserves sometimes, right?
Yeah, but I
Sometimes you
can
do know.
definitely say I had a large funder change priorities, and like I burst out into tears. I was so upset because I just knew how meaningful that was and how much their support meant. I realized I have so much of my emotion invested in this, which is great and made me a good fundraiser, but I was going to burn out. I could feel it at that moment.
I feel like that's a sign of already burnt out, no?
Yeah, yeah, that's true. That's true. Maybe I waited a bit too long there.
Yeah. I feel like whenever I start feeling burnt out, I get a lot snippier and a lot more personally devastated by things that are, it's just work. Like, it is important what we do, but it's not a personal affront either, right?
It's when I find myself thinking about work and trying to plan out work priorities when I'm trying to be present with my son that I'm like, okay, things need to change. I'm not going to solve this problem and also play keepy uppy in my living room with my son. Like I need to like just be present.
What kind of actionable tips would you say to someone who is their own like one person fundraising department? What can they take away from this episode?
I would say some of the things that really helped me were reaching out and connecting with support. One of the ways that I did that was listening to this very podcast, but also aggressively networking and trying to go for coffees and everything. There's a lot of loneliness involved, and it can feel good to understand that you're not the only person dealing with these issues. And, because you do have to trust your own voice in this. And then, yeah, trusting your instincts, but also being clear when you need support and asking for it. I was having a call earlier today about somebody, who is this whole fundraiser who's looking to get coaching. And I think like things like that are a great idea, like getting support externally, because you can't do everything and you can't be expected to grow on your own. Like you need to have some professional development and support. One of the things I've thought about a lot is the fractional fundraiser service that we offer. If I had gone into an organization that had a fractional fundraiser before me, somebody experienced to come in and set up those systems, I could have hit the ground running so much faster to just have somebody who knew what they were doing and set that groundwork and set like kind of a template that I could then run with and build off of. So I think things like that, maybe not for a person who is in that role, but for organizations who are looking to expand their fundraising, I really love this service and what we do and what people do to provide that level of expertise and set things up in the right way, because you can waste a lot of time setting things up in the wrong way or doing things incorrectly if you don't have the experience.
I taught myself how to build websites because I was a one-person, fundraising department. Imagine if I didn't have to do that. Like the
Mm-hmm.
time that I would have saved that I could have put into other fundraising campaigns would have been huge. I
Yeah.
think my takeaway would be, yeah, spend the money if it saves you the time. Like that's always really, really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
If
Yeah.
there is no money, then work on setting up better systems so at least you can save yourself the time.
I think there's a huge return on investment for setting up systems and getting the support that you need and getting some expertise in as well. I know it can be really hard to pitch that to nonprofit organizations and to boards when they don't see the immediate return, but understanding that is a huge return on investment to either take the time to get your system set up right or invest some money in support, or if you're an organization looking at it, investing a year of fractional fundraising, having somebody who has been doing this for decades coming in, setting up the systems, and just building the groundwork so you can get somebody who maybe doesn't have that experience to come in and learn from the things we've already built for them.
We're doing that with one of Further Together's clients with their case for support. Having a case for support now means you can apply to all these different grants without having to piece together pieces of grants time
Mm-hmm.
and time again, right? So that's one system that people listening can immediately implement. Like write your
Mm-hmm.
case for support, have it in one document, and use that document to apply for grants. Like don't keep piecing it together.
Totally. I found out what a case for support was way too late in my career. So now I'm like, that sounds amazing. And yes, I should have had that from day one. Something that I did have that helped me out as well. And maybe is a quicker process than case for support, because that does take some time to put together, but it's worth it very much. Anybody who's listening. But one of the very first things I did was collecting key quotes and having that in a quotes database that I provide to clients, even just putting that into a Word document. I typed them all out. I looked through some forms and everything, obviously respecting confidentiality and anonymity and making sure that I could share those quotes. But that's huge for getting that personal element and being able to share somebody's words. That was huge for me when I was first starting.
Back to the adaptability piece and the Word document. I
Mm-hmm.
remember, like, I don't know, 8 years ago, I was putting together a style guide, which was just a Word document of like, these are the fonts we use, these are the colors, this is how we refer to the organization, this is not how we refer to the organization, right? So just having it, even if it's really informal, just having
Mm-hmm.
something on paper will help you move faster every single time.
Totally. Yeah. And just having everybody singing from the same page and looking the same. I had a really, yeah, my first organization where it was the only fundraiser. That was such an interesting experience because it was working with 3 different sites and program sites. This was 2019, not that long ago, but there was no shared file system between any of them. Like there wasn't like a shared Google Drive, there wasn't a shared like Microsoft Suite. So getting those pieces together, having those admin and those systems made me able to, like, I didn't have to call up so and so from the Vancouver site so to get this password for the TD login. Like I could just do it myself. Like I had the information to hand. So even if someone is starting out in a new role, your board or your ED or whoever might be looking at you being like, go apply for grants. You have to have this groundwork and be able to access this information quickly to do anything you need to do.
Oh my God, I'm getting flashbacks of when you started a new job as the only fundraiser. And it's like, okay, where's this password? It's like, you're going to have to ask that person that was a fundraiser 3 fundraisers ago. It's like, what is your date of birth?
Yeah. 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 I mean, I was there for 2.5 years and there were still passwords that we never knew. There was one printed out sheet in one of the offices and had everything crossed out every time somebody updated. I had to take a picture of it.
I love that small nonprofit stuff. It's
It
hilarious.
was, yeah, it was so fun and grassroots, and it was an interesting experience. There was no ED at that organization either, so it was just me.
Oh my goodness. One of the things that I learned way too late into my career was that there's nonprofits set up to help nonprofits. There's one called asadvice.org, and what they do
Mm,
is you can reach out to them and they'll help you do a strategic plan for free.
wow, that's
Yeah, because it's like
amazing.
it's all like retired nonprofit professionals, but still there's resources like that.
Yeah.
There's another one in my province called Reboot, and what they do
Mm,
is they take donated computers from large corporations, clean them up, and give them to nonprofits. So your computer's like 5 years old instead of 20.
that is so great. There's definitely a lot of resources. I love TechSoup. TechSoup has been so great, and it really allowed me to be able to upgrade the tech in my organizations at like a low cost. And I think that's like, yeah, national and in the States as well. And yeah, it was just great to be able to be like, okay, here's your shared filing system. We're on Microsoft now.
Awesome. Well, Caitlin, it's been so lovely having you. If people want to continue the conversation, where can they find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn. It's just my name, Caitlin McBride, or you can reach out via our website, gofurthertogether.ca. If anybody wants to reach out, we do consultation calls. You can just book in the link and you'll end up chatting with one of us.
Thank you for being here today.
Thanks. So fun.
Thank you all for listening to another episode of the Small Nonprofit Podcast. As always, if you would like to see our lovely faces, they will be on YouTube. Yeah, thank you. And I hope that if you're a one person shop, that you got something out of this. Hang in there. We've all been through it, and I'm sure you'll do great things. That's it for today. Bye for now. Thank you for listening to another episode of The Small Nonprofit. If you want to continue the conversation, feel free to connect with our guests directly or find me on LinkedIn. Let's keep moving money to mission and prioritizing our well-being. Bye for now.